The second type of immunity we need to talk about is adaptive immunity. And adaptive immunity is specific to our pathogens. Something else that is special to just our adaptive immunity is that it is acquired throughout our lifetime, so it's not something that we are born with necessarily. And then it is also special in the fact that it remembers. So once you've gained this type of immunity, you typically keep it. And then, as we said with your immune system, this is for vertebrates only. So anything with a backbone is our vertebrates. And it's going to be using a variety of different cells, but it uses mostly B cells and T cells to accomplish this function, which we will talk about what those two things are. And then it happens at a slower rate, so it's not going to be as quick of an onset. And so the response time is typically anywhere starting above that 96-hour mark. So it is slower to develop, but it is long-lasting. So some mechanisms for this type is humoral immunity, which is our B cells and our antibodies, which we'll talk about. And then the other is cellular immunity, which comes from our T cells. As we are talking about our adaptive immunity, it's something that must be introduced to a specific pathogen, and it must recognize, our body must recognize it as a threat before it can handle it. So your body has to understand what's going on and that this bacteria or whatever is a threatening foreign object before it'll actually put into place the adaptive immunity system. But once it is in place, it does have the ability to remember specific pathogens so that the body can achieve immunity. So it's not just remembering the process, it remembers specific to that individual pathogen. So if you notice in our picture here, we have a maybe mother, a parent and a baby. And this starts right away, especially if you are breastfeeding, but even not in the womb. You as a baby are getting some of your adaptive immunity from your mother. So as we said, humoral immunity is one of the ways that adaptive immunity works. It's one of the mechanisms. So what humoral immunity does is that it is dispatching our antibodies. And one of the cells that accomplishes this is our B lymphocytes. And if you remember, lymphocytes is our word for white blood cells. So they are B cells that are made and mature in our bone marrow. So that's something special about our blood cells, is that they don't actually go through the process of mitosis. They're specially made in your bone marrow. And what it is that they're doing is that they're distinguishing between our good and our bad cells. So they're the ones that are determining if this is a foreign cell and then what we should do to that foreign cell. And some of our B lymphocytes have effector cells that also are going to help them fight off the infection. So in these effector cells, they're going to have tons and tons of rough ER. And if we remember, rough ER is one of our organelles from biology. And what they do is that they're making proteins. And this means they're going to mass produce antibodies. Antibodies is a type of protein. And they're really mass producing them, where we have 2,000 per second, which is just imaginable. Some of these B lymphocytes also have memory cells, and so that they have these memory cells, that way they won't forget how to fight this in the future. And our second mechanism for adaptive immunity was our cellular immunity. And this works by our cellular defenses when the pathogens have made their way through the cell membrane. So again, they must have made their way inside the cell at this point for this level to have taken over. So the cell that is responsible for cellular immunity is our T lymphocytes, so our T cells. And again, these are white blood cells that mature, but this time they're different, but they mature in our thymus. This is where they get the name T lymphocytes, because of the thymus. And they are acting as a special forces unit in your cells, and they are causing inflammation to happen. So inflammation is going to activate our macrophages and regulate the immune response. So this process of causing the inflammation is very important for our cellular immunity. We're going to look at two major types of our T cells. And the first one is our helper T cells. And our helper T cells are going to activate cells once there is a problem. And if they decide there is a problem, they're going to get our killer T cells out to help with the problem. And then our second type is the actual killer T cells themselves, and they are going to kill the cells that go bad. So whether it's a pathogen and it's a bad cell that we don't like, or if it's like a tumor growing and we decide that we don't like that cell anymore. So today we're going to end by talking about treatment for bacterial infection. So we're looking at the term antibiotics, and they're specifically treating bacterial illnesses. Note that we did not include bacteria and viruses. Antibiotics only work for bacterial illnesses. So what they're doing is they're going to target specific bacterial structures to kill them. So maybe they're going to focus on the cell membrane, maybe the cell wall, but a specific structure is going to be attacked, and that is what is going to be their demise. So our first ever antibiotics were actually made from fungus, which is what penicillin is. So you're pretty much all familiar with this antibiotic, but it initially was from a type of fungus. And then nowadays, most of the time we are not actually out getting these from the wild, we are getting them artificially. But the major issue with this type of antibiotic treatment is that we are running the issue of antibiotic resistance. So there are things like MRSA, which we have talked about, I think, a little briefly before, and it's multi-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. There are currently no ways to treat this type of infection. This is very common too. A staph infection is very normal for wrestlers, and oftentimes there is no treatment for them because they are resistant to any antibiotics that we have available. And I have included this picture here because we often make this mistake on our own and lead to the problem of antibiotic resistance because as consumers of antibiotics, we often don't take our prescriptions correctly. And when our doctors prescribe this or antibiotics to us, we don't take all of the 10 days or however many days, we just stop when we feel better. And this is part of the problem leading to such an issue with antibiotic resistance. So take all of your prescription as the pills tell you, as the bottle tells you.